Lisa, I started doing triathlons in the 1990s, and I used to actually my dad used to get me the North American triathlete magazines delivered. They always came in really late, but it was the only thing we could do then to keep it in, and you were always all over those. So this is really cool to actually sit down and chat with you, because you were one of the heroes of the sport when I was getting started. But how did you get into it? How did you get into triathlon?
Well, now you're the hero of nutrition.
Yeah.
I got into triathlon in university.
Yeah.
I was a runner in high school, a little bit, but more of an academic. So I need to get a scholarship to university. I got to university, kept up my running, but like everyone in that generation, you get injured.
Yeah.
So I would bike and swim for fitness.
Yeah.
And then friends said, let's do a triathlon, and that was it. I started to do a triathlon, and I loved it. I loved that it was sort of a full body workout, really, when you combine all three sports.
Yeah.
And I really embraced it. It was a big part of my friendships in university.
Yeah, fantastic. So cross training was the catalyst.
Absolutely.
I guess, like a lot of us, yeah. And then the really interesting part of your story for me is obviously you're a multiple champion, 11 Ironman wins, but you have a condition called cystic fibrosis, which I learned about because when I was doing Ironman races in the heat, I would regularly visit the medical tent with a condition called hyponatremia, where I would dilute the salt levels down in my body. And it was identified to me through a doctor friend, this was because I sweat out a lot of salt, which is a characteristic of CF. So that's when I learned about CF and CF testing, and this is probably 20 years ago now. But tell me your story of how you got diagnosed and what happened.
Well, I was not diagnosed as a baby, and this is a genetic disease, so historically children are tested at birth, and they can test for cystic fibrosis by a high sodium concentration in their sweat. And they didn't have testing when I was a baby. But I was a sick kid, and it was always blamed on allergies. And I remember the pharmacist calling my mom and saying, you know, your daughter's been on antibiotics for 9 months now. That's not really right. And my mom would tease and say, oh, we're going to go to Florida in March and we'll throw her in the ocean for a while and she'll come out well. Which ironically now, that sort of therapy is a therapy to have sodium inhalation. Anyways, I went off to university and started to do triathlon. And my sister was quite unwell, coughing up blood, and they did a ton of tests, and eventually they did a sweat chloride test, and it came back that she had cystic fibrosis. With it being genetic, we all got tested, and it turned out that myself and my brother also had cystic fibrosis. But I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my 20s, and so I was indestructible, of course, because I'm 20 and doing triathlon at university. So I'm like, oh, fantastic, now I'll just get on one antibiotic and I won't have to be on it for 9 months. They'll know exactly what to do. So I never looked at it as being anything bad at the time. So I just kept on doing triathlon and doing sport and loving it. And when I got sick, and I'd get on antibiotics. And, you know, I guess gradually as time went on, I was getting more infections, and they were getting a bit more serious. And, but I think at the time, everyone wanted to talk about the fact that I had cystic fibrosis. And by that, I mean everyone as the media. They want to make a big deal out of it. And I really didn't want to, because I was always of the personality that I need to prove myself as an athlete first. I don't want to be on the cover of your magazine because I have cystic fibrosis. I want to be on the cover of your magazine because I just won a race. And so I didn't really talk about it. And I shied away from it a lot. I just would get on antibiotics, race sick, no excuses, no regrets, just did my thing. I went to Pan Am Games in '95. I was really quite sick at that. And actually at that, the media wanted to do a bit about the fact that I had CF, and I actually said no, because I just said it implicates my whole family because it's genetic. So I stepped away from it, and then my real goal was to win an Ironman. And I worked really hard, and 5 years later I won an Ironman, and was healthy, and that was amazing, and still kept CF a secret. And then as time went on and I was now winning races, it seemed kind of empty for me to be winning races. It was like, yeah, I'm winning races, but like there's got to be more to it than just crossing the finish line first. And I kind of went back to, I have cystic fibrosis. Like people can probably find a bit of hope in that. And because I was starting to really understand the disease and how devastating it is when you have a baby and the doctor says, hey, your kid has CF. Like the parents are heartbroken. Like I'm gonna have a child who's gonna have a limited lifespan, a limited health span. And so I was like, I think God put me here and and chose this career of sport for me because I have CF and because maybe I have another purpose. And finding that purpose was really instrumental in my career. So yes, I have cystic fibrosis. Yes, it limits my lung function. Yes, I'm on antibiotics a lot, which seems like such a detriment. But I found so much purpose in it that I really believe I probably wouldn't have won 11 Ironmans without it.
Yeah.
Because I had purpose.
Yeah.
And there was no way I was ever going to quit. And that's what Ironman's all about, is problem solving, get your way to the finish line. So I raced sick a lot. And then the big thing that held me back, mainly in Hawaii, was the sodium.
Yeah, the hydration. That's what I wanted to just ask you about specifically, because I have, similarly high salt loss, not necessarily quite as high as most people with CF, but it was definitely an Achilles heel for me. And I made lots of mistakes trying to combat that with over drinking water and not understanding about sodium and fluid balance. So how did you manage that in races?
Well, I made all those mistakes. Lots of hydration. Would get to races early to acclimatize, but end up sweating out all my sodium in the acclimatization period. So it took a bad race in Hawaii, where I basically started cramping 4 hours into the race, crying, muscles in spasm, never knew about taking salt pills, and got to the finish line crying, screaming, and they were going to put me on IV, and I said, I think it's probably a sodium issue. And then they took my blood and said, yeah, you're going to go into shock, and we got to, probably either send you to the hospital or force feed you potato chips. And so when I finished that, came out of that, I said, I can train all the hours in the world, but if I don't get this sorted out, I'm in trouble. So at the time, there was a thing called LavaMan, or Lava Lab or something in Hawaii, and I did testing. We found exactly how much sodium I lost per hour. And so I resorted to taking salt pills with water to help myself get over that. And so that became my routine. And once I started doing that, I found success in Hawaii.
Fantastic.
And so I would drink electrolyte drinks, so I wouldn't I wouldn't take too much water. And the days leading up to the race, salt my foods, take salt pills, etc. And then in the race, take salt pills. I mean, at the most I took in a race would be 4 salt pills per hour.
4 salt pills per hour. So do you know what the numbers with those would be? So was
it's
that
about 350?
About 350
milligrams per sodium.
Wow, so well over 1,000 milligrams per hour.
And I mean, I lost about 2,000 milligrams an hour was what they found in like 70 degrees, perfectly balanced, not racing hard. So I knew I lost a lot of sodium, but you can't replace that in a race because you can't. Sodium needs a vehicle. It needs the water.
Correct.
And so if you can't drink enough water to take 10 salt pills an hour. So you have to have that balance, because the opposite will happen is you're going to throw your GI tract into disarray. So it's not an exact science. It's a balancing act between taking enough sodium that your body can tolerate with enough fluids, and then getting acclimatized. So that was my strategy. So I think 3 salt pills an hour on the bike still brought me to cramping on the marathon. So I went up to 4. On the run, it's so much more difficult to get the fluids in, so I tried to get more sodium in on the bike. So I would take 4 salt pills an hour on the bike, and then onto the marathon I would take 3 salt pills per hour. But the big thing was to acclimatize. So I would get to Hawaii about 4 weeks early and gradually train my body to sweat out less salt because as it got acclimatized. So that's what I did. And then in training, doing the same things in training.
Practicing it
in training, and not relying on, really, water was not my hydration principle. It was electrolyte drink. And I didn't drink electrolyte drink for the calories. I drank electrolyte drink for the electrolytes. So when people factor their electrolyte drink sometimes into their caloric, I kind of just said that was the bonus. Like, we can all use more calories. And I saw the great work that you said about how many grams Ashley Gentle had in the race. And we need that. So, I was always trying to get about 60 grams of carbohydrates per hour in the race. And whatever I got in my electrolyte was a bonus. Because you always need that bonus. And I always wanted in Hawaii to, even if I could get an extra banana an hour in addition to it, because that's the potassium that you're sweating out as well. And as long as you train your body to tolerate it, you can pretty much do anything.
And that's what I find amazing about that is you're obviously on that extreme end of the sodium loss spectrum, so you kind of learned about it the hard way. We've got loads of case studies on our website now of people, we've got an Aussie guy in there who loses around about 2,200 milligrams per hour, and he had all these race fails. He was just ending up in the medical, it's exactly the same type of things as you, and basically had kind of come to the same strategy through doing some sweat testing, working out, then going out doing runs and cycles, working out his total sweat volume loss. This guy sweats out like 2.5 litres an hour as well, so he's just, but managed to get his way to the finish of an Ironman in a really, you know, top 5 in his age group.
That's awesome.
with adequate salt replacement. So it's really, you know, this is going on all the time with different people, and still I think there's a bit of a lack of education, which is what we're trying to bridge that gap really. One thing you also said, which I just wanted to quiz you on really quickly, is the cramping stuff, because cramping is really controversial in sport. A lot of sports scientists will say, you know, it's sodium balance problem. Then there's a whole camp of people who say it's got nothing to do with electrolyte balance, and you mentioned it in relation to the salt. So did you find you were cramping more when you didn't have adequate sodium?
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, I knew that it was, you know, I'm climbing out of Havi, and my arms are cramping. I'm not using my arms except to balance my bike. My arms shouldn't be cramping at all. And so it just was like weird. And then my quads were cramping. And I think when we're talking about muscle cramping that isn't sodium related, we're talking about someone who hasn't trained their body to withstand and to tolerate the level of exertion. And we have to separate the two. So I you know, once I retired, I did the Boston Marathon, and my calves were cramping. And I can unequivocally say that was not sodium. It was because my training for the marathon, I didn't get up on my toes at all. But when I race, I get up on my toes. So now you didn't train at all on your toes, and now you're gonna run 3 hours at race pace on your toes. Well, you're going to cramp. And that has nothing to do with sodium.
No, that's a mechanical,
it's a mechanical issue.
Muscular fatigue issue.
And a muscular failure. So we have to sort of, you know, nothing is, we like to make science exact, but there has to be the interpretation that comes from talking to people, from having your dream team, from having a coach, from having experts like you guys, and then looking at the day. But, you know, in most cases, and when I'm coaching athletes, my advice to people is if you're doing a long day, like anything over 3 hours where you're going to take a lot of sodium and potassium out of your body, you can, without even trying it, you could probably get away with enhancing your sodium by 300 to 500 milligrams per hour with appropriate amount of water. You can do that almost as a no-brainer because you're going to sweat that out. If it's a hot day, then I think you're pretty safe with taking around 700 milligrams, which would be like 2 salt pills with enough water without problem. If you're talking about an extreme sweater, then we're talking the multiples. Now we're talking about a massive strategy to deal with that. But, you know, even this morning I had oatmeal, I've salted it. You know, because I know yesterday I was sweating like crazy.
Because you've been out and about in the heat all day.
All day, and I wasn't drinking electrolyte drink. I was just drinking water because that's all I had access to. But we have to be proactive. It's wonderful that you guys have the tablets. So you can just have those with you in your knapsack, walking around, you can pop them in some water. So having those strategies and tools in place are really important, especially, I mean, if there's kids with CF, I can only encourage them to exercise. It's one of the most important things.
That's what I was going to ask you, because the advice definitely used to be to minimise exertion because they thought it was bad for the lungs and that sort of thing. What is your message to people who see this, who are dealing with the challenges of CF?
My message is to exercise. You've got to get those lungs healthy. You've got to get them strong, and it's got to be in the parameters of your health, of course. But you have to be, you know, getting strong. The doctors say to me all the time, you're as healthy as you are because of the exercise you do. When I retired from professional sport, my doctor said, I expect your lung function, your lung capacity to decrease. And I'm like, really? And she said, no, because you're just not going to be doing the exertion. So I do expect it. So of course that was a challenge. I'm like, well, I promise I'll do intervals 2 times a week. And my least healthy days are days where I'm in an airplane for 20 hours because I'm not moving. I can't move my lungs. I fell a couple of months ago and I hurt my ribs and couldn't breathe properly. Within 2 days I had a lung infection. And that's just the way that it is with CF. So you've got to exercise. And so if you're going to exercise, if you're a child and you're going to be playing hockey or soccer or baseball, then your mom and dad need to have either salty water for you or hydration products such as Precision Hydration, which are going to have the appropriate sodium in it. But it can't be water. Can't be your hydration strategy if you have cystic fibrosis.
Yeah.
It has to be some sort of electrolyte drink, and that just become like kids with CF, people with CF have pancreas problems. They take enzymes each day. Well, you also have to take sodium every day.
Yeah, because it removes another barrier from doing sport, basically, and
Exactly.
get that bit right. Yeah.
Yeah.